Hello, good evening, and welcome to XY Spark. This is your boy Rolando. We're so glad that you've decided to be with us again for another one of our live programs. And this evening, we have a very powerful, exciting presentation for you. We have a special guest who has decided, one more person has decided that they are going to become a part of the XY Spark family. And guys, I'm so excited just to have our guests with us this evening, and just before I introduce my guest, guys, I just want to say to you that we are really appreciative that night after night, each time we're on the air, you take the time out of your schedule just to pay attention to what we're saying. And we hope that you have been finding our programs beneficial and that our programs have been helping you to practice healthy masculinity and to be the best version of yourself. Because at XY Spark, that is our motto, that is our goal, that is our passion to promote healthy masculinity and see men live their best lives. And so this evening, we have a special guest with us, okay? And just before I introduce my special guest to you guys, I just want you to know that I hope that you're prepared for our presentation tonight. I just want to say to you, fasten your seatbelts because we're going to be going in for a beautiful trip with our special guest. But just before I introduce my special guest, please don't go away. We'll be right back after this short intro.
Grief and loss, trauma, mental health, alcohol and drug use, gender roles, anger management, self-esteem, sexual abuse, domestic violence, and the pressures of societal norms are real-life issues that affect men. Join Rolando, psychotherapist, author, life coach, and motivational speaker that has dedicated his profession to working with men to find a healthier alternative to cope and handle these stressors. Rolando believes that men are lacking in social, psychological, emotional, and spiritual support that is necessary for a lifestyle that promotes healthy masculinity. We invite you to join us on XY Spark, where we discuss issues that men face. At XY Spark, we believe the key for happier families is restoring healthy masculinity.
Thank you very much for staying with us. This is Rolando again, and tonight we want to introduce to you a special guest. Our special guest is Sunil Godse, and I think I would not do justice enough to try to introduce Sunil. So, Sunil, how are you doing, man? Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to join you and your listeners today, and happy to drop some knowledge bombs on this intangible thing called intuition that we all seem to think we have. But I'm going to help you actually trust it every single day for every single decision. And today, you're going to learn how to do just that.
Man, Sunil, let me tell you, guys, I'm going to tell you, man, when I met Sunil, our initial contact, I'm saying this guy sounds like he has something powerful to give to the world. And when I asked Sunil if he would want to become a part of our program here at XY Spark, he willingly said, Rolando, I wouldn't miss it for the world. So, Sunil, thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the CEO and founder of Intuitionology Incorporated, and I really took this deep dive into intuition after a series of things that happened to me in my life, and I really needed to dig deep. And I'll share with you sort of the journey of that, and how not only we miss the mark on this thing we call intuition that we seem to walk around saying that we trust or watch on social media themes, but there's an actual procedure and there's a proper way to listen to it. When we do, we make the right decisions, and we have to be careful because when we ignore it, we start to waste a lot of time in our lives making bad decisions. And as we're going to be talking through this podcast today, many of your listeners are really going to reflect on their own situations. So this is a very much a journey about my story, as more so your story and how you'll be taking this journey along with me.
Wow, Sunil, you just started, and already my ears are peeled back. My ears are peeled back because I'm excited to hear what you're gonna say. So you are the CEO and founder of, you say, Intuitionology.
Yes.
Okay. How was this born? Where did this come from?
Yeah, so it really started from my first book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster, and the premise of that book was that if I could write about the failures and hurdles of executives and entrepreneurs, then anybody reading that book, they should be able to read and learn that those lessons so that they actually don't fail themselves, and so hence Fail Fast, Succeed Faster, which was the title. And so when I used to speak on stages around the world about this book, one of the things that I kept getting from a lot of the people in the crowd was, Sunil, give me one thing that's going to make me successful. And so at that time, I used to roll my eyes and say, okay, I didn't come here with a cue card or a PDF sheet. I have a 400-page book here. I've interviewed 300 people. It's not just one thing that's going to help you to be successful until I went back to the audio recordings. And when I went to the audio recordings, what I found out was 80 to 90% of those business executives and on CEOs and entrepreneurs all use this form of, I didn't trust my intuition. I didn't trust my gut. I knew what the right decision was, but I didn't take it. And so that really fascinated me. And so when I looked at my own life to see, okay, when did intuition kind of hit me and I distinctly remember when I was 5 years old, there were these video games that I wanted. Yet my dad was saying they're too expensive. And I remember this voice telling me, Sunil, go door to door to raise money. And that's exactly what I did. I went door to door. I raised $200. I gave $100 to my dad. And the other $100 I gave to charity because that's what my school was giving. And I felt super good about that. And so that was one thing that was crystal clear. And then I started to reflect on the times that I ignored my intuition. And the first thing I remember is for those who might notice with my name, I'm an East Indian male. And when you're East Indian, when you drink the East Indian Kool-Aid, there's basically 4 career doors that you get presented and you're
Mm,
groomed for. And
mm-hmm,
that's basically doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. That's it.
mm,
And and so I picked door number 3, which was engineering. My dad was an engineer, yet something was telling me, different from a voice, to not do that. Something was telling me to be an entrepreneur because every breadcrumb I had in my life up to then had some form of entrepreneurial spirit in it, whether it's in marketing, sales, ops, whatever it is, whatever I did, there was something entrepreneurial about what I was getting involved in.
mm,
Yet I ignored that something, got into engineering, and I absolutely hated it. And 2 years in, I got a chance to become a private investor in a Mexican restaurant chain that was coming up to Canada. And pretty soon I was making 5 times more in dividends as private investor than I was in engineering. And so in year 3, I quit. I lost my relationship with my dad. That was devastating. But
mm,
again, something was telling me to quit. And I listened to that something finally, and I absolutely loved it. And 5 or 6 ventures later, about $20 million in revenues was what I earned. And then I morphed into a management consultant. And as a
mm,
management consultant, I got this one huge opportunity to go to Silicon Valley. It was a massive contract.
mm-hmm,
And yet the contract terms started changing. And another something different from the voice and different from the first something I had was telling me to not take that contract. Yet I ignored
mm,
that something. I went down to Silicon Valley. I spent every single penny going down there, and
mm-hmm,
the company didn't pay me.
mm.
And I came back to Canada with literally 25 cents in my bank account. Uh,
Wow.
and the very last thing that really got me to pay attention was when I was in engineering in university. I was doing some personal coaching at a time, and I had a friend of mine who was being stalked. And so she said, Sunil, I really need some advice. And once again, something was telling me to meet with her that afternoon. And for
Mm-hmm,
some reason, I ignored that something. And I said, let's meet a couple of days later. And unfortunately, what happened is the very next day, that same guy who was stalking her walked up to her at a bus shelter and put a bullet through her head and killed her instantly.
wow.
And now my time was wasted, money, effort, and now a good friend was gone because I ignored this something called intuition. And so I really, really needed to find out, okay, what is this thing called intuition? Because
Mm-hmm,
now some serious stuff has happened in my life. And what I struggled with initially was the definition. Like I couldn't realize, like, how come I can't find a definition? I went online, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things online at that time was talking about manifestation, voices from God. And it's great that people define intuition that way. That didn't resonate with me. And I went online to some online dictionaries, whatever they had. That still didn't resonate with me. And I do remember, though, that there was somebody in my social circle who was an international psychic, and she talked about intuition as signals. And so that really resonated with me. So I went to go interview her, and she talked about intuition and signals. She also talked about intuition being sort of energetic, with quantum mechanics, and that really resonated with me because if I look back to my engineering days, in engineering, if you look at steel, for example, steel has like a mass-like property and an energy or wave-like property. So I started to think about intuition like an art and a science. So the art part is these sort of signals, but the science part was not there yet. And one of the things that this international psychic was saying is that the research just hasn't caught up yet. And so I was a little perplexed because I'm thinking, okay, if intuition kind of affected me, and if I've now written a book, and 80 to 90% of the close to 300 people are telling me that they ignore their intuition, how come there's no science to this? And so I looked again in my circle of contacts, and I had a neurologist who was a colleague of mine. And I told him I'd like to interview him for this thing called intuition. He says, come on down. So I took my film crew to his hospital where he was practicing. And we went to a boardroom, and I turned on the camera expecting maybe a couple of minutes of him humming and hawing and kind of telling me something about intuition. And I said, Dr. Rathbone, does intuition exist? And he says, it absolutely exists. We all have a sixth sense. He trusts his patients with it. He says that he starts to experience, he starts to tell me about the neurological basis for it, where it goes into the gut, and the gut short circuits the brain. And he also said that more and more neuroscience research is coming, showing that the intuition actually hits us much earlier than we're actually consciously aware of it. And so now I've got the art, and now I've got the science, and now my definition for me is whole. And so with Dr. Rathbone talking about this research, I needed to get my hands on this research to see, okay, what is the research actually saying? And so I went to an academic database and started typing the word intuition. And I was expecting maybe 10 to 12 articles. I hit the enter button, tens of thousands of articles on intuition.
Hmm.
And now some of the things that I thought about before are actually being backed by research. So, for example, one of the things I thought about was, if intuition hit me when I was 5 years old, perhaps I'm born with it. And there was this research paper that showed that infants as young as 2 months old have been shown to have intuitive capabilities, or what this research paper says, intuitive physics. And then the next thing is, the reason why I struggled with the definition was because when intuition hits you, brain scans were showing that intuition hits the amygdala, which is the primitive part of your brain. It knows it's those fight, flight, think, like, trust. That's it. It has zero capacity for language. And so that makes sense in that the definition that I needed to have was the language I put around it. So just like you'll define definition differently, each of your listeners will define the intuition very differently, because it's all hitting us at the amygdala, the primitive part of our brain, where there is no capacity for language.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that piece. And then with Dr. Rathbone saying that it actually happens much earlier than we think, lo and behold, there's this research paper that shows that intuition acts on average 7 to 10 seconds before we actually make a decision or take an action.
Hmm.
And so now I'm really intrigued. Now I've got the actual signals, and now I have hardcore science and research backing what I think about intuition. And so the next thing I wanted to find out is, okay, how does this thing actually work? And so if you think about intuition like driving a car, you get into a car, you turn on the keys, or you push the button, and you hear the engine whir, which are your signals, and then you simply drive. And what you often don't do is you pop open the hood. Like, we don't need to be mechanics to drive a car. But I'm a bit of a nerd in that I need to sort of pop the hood open to try and find out, okay, what is this thing called intuition? And I need to go a little bit deeper. And what I found out is that there's the engine or is actually comprised into two different sets of signals. There's positive signals and negative signals. So for each one of your listeners, if you go back to any of the decisions that you did make, there's often a feeling associated with that decision. And that feeling is your intuition. So for me, it's like a flow or the dots are connecting. And I was actually interviewing this CEO, and this CEO sees omens. He sees this, it doesn't have a shape or a color, but it shows up on his right shoulder. And when that omen pops up, if he's doing a business deal, if he's hiring someone or dealing with a vendor, and that omen pops up, that's a positive intuitive signal. He says yes to what he's doing, and the deal gets done. And so that was really interesting. The other side is negative signals. And so with negative signals, what happens is it actually starts very subtle in nature. So I'm sure every one of us, including your listeners, have walked into a room where you kind of go, you know what, something's off here. And that's your subtle negative signal happening. And so what happens, and that's the ones that we actually ignore. And so when you have these subtle negative signals, and you ignore them, they're going to start to get louder and louder and change until you can no longer ignore them anymore. And so for some of the people I've interviewed, and I interviewed now over 1,000 people for my podcast series, they've said, some have said that they've been bankrupt, they've gotten into a car crash, they've been homeless, or they tried to take their own life as the ultimate negative signal. And there was one entrepreneur that I was interviewing, and he said, Sunil, I don't really know what my negative signal is. Like, nobody's ever asked me that. Yet, when we started to talk about the failures he had and the ventures that he went into for the wrong reasons, such as money or fame or ego, he started to grab his left earlobe as he kept talking about that situation. And it just dawned on him. He goes, Sunil, now I remember when I went into each one of these adventures, which I knew it was the wrong thing to get into, and my left earlobe started pulsating with heat. And so he also remembers talking to his wife about these ventures. And every single time he started to complain to his wife about these ventures, his left earlobe started pulsating with heat. And so this is now his unique negative signal. And so we each have these signals that are negative and positive for each one of us. And that's how unique they are for each one of us. So for me, it would be that gut feeling or just something is off. For somebody else, it's again a left earlobe. For others, it's the hairs on the back of the neck standing up. And the other thing I found out is that there's actually 4 types of intuition that actually work all together in a split second. And what happens is then it sends you a signal to tell you what the right decision is. And
Mm.
the best way I can explain these 4 types is actually through a non-believer's case study.
Hmm.
And so one of my first interviewees is the fellow by the name of John Rothschild. And John was an investment banker.
Mhm.
So if I was to talk to him about what he knew was that intuition to him, remember the online stuff was about manifestation and voices from God and things like that. So for John, who's an investment banker, he just does not connect with that type of definition. So he just didn't think intuition existed at all. And so I tried to tell John about that CEO who sees omens, and he goes, Sunil, you know what? I wish I could really. I want to shake the guy's hand who actually sees omens, but you know what, Sunil? When it comes to decisions that you make, it's actually based on experience and learning. And I said, okay, John, but actually, and this is now where we're going to get into the 4 types of intuition. One of the types of intuition is called experiential intuition.
Mhm.
And if you think about your brain like an iceberg, 90% underwater is the subconscious part of your brain, and the 10% is above water. That's your conscious part of your brain. And so every day since you were born, your intuition is taking all the experiences that you've got, all the learning that you have, both good and bad, failures and successes, positive, negative, formal, informal, your experiences and the experiences of others, and every day putting it into the subconscious area of your brain like a library. So when you're ready to make a decision, your intuition is going to go into the library of experience and learning that you have. It'll pull out exactly what you need for that situation and
Mm-hmm.
then give you a signal. So if it's a positive signal, then your intuition is basically telling you, Sunil, you got this. You've got the skills that you've had before. You've done this. You've been there. This is something you can do. And that's when it gives you a positive signal. If it's a negative signal, it's going to say, Sunil, listen, buddy, you've done this before and it didn't turn out well. I'm not sure why you're doing it again, but I'm telling you, you better back away. And so that's how that positive and negative signals work based on your own experiences. And so what I was telling John is that in some cases, your intuition helps you go against the data.
Hmm.
And John goes, well, that's kind of funny. I have an example of this. And so I said, okay, tell me your example.
Mm-hmm.
So John was in the business of putting franchise locations together. And so what he did is that if there was let's say it was a benchmarking system of out of 10, a good franchise location that he would actually put into play would be a 9 out of 10. And they looked at things like demographics, development of the area, and traffic flows as examples.
Mm-hmm.
There was this one area of Toronto, a really crappy area of Toronto that his team looked at, which was a 5.5 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going to get into the second of 4 intuition called situational intuition. He walks into that situation in Toronto and he takes a look around. And now I'm quoting John. He says, something is telling me, perhaps it's intuition, I'm not sure, but something is telling me that we need to put this location here, even though it's a 5.5 out of 10.
Hmm.
And he tells his team that he's going to go ahead. His team was really mad, yet he put a location there. And that location ended up being one of the most successful franchise operations called the Beer Market under
Wow.
all of the portfolios that he had.
Mm.
And so now John is getting it. And eventually John starts talking about his purpose changing.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of going from being an investment banker, he now wants to own a business.
Hmm.
And now we're going to get into the third of the 4 called relational intuition. What relational intuition does is it filters all your relationships so that the only people that you bring inside your inner circle are those that really care about who you are, what your purpose is, where you're going, your success, not necessarily yes people, but they will support you during the ups and downs, thick and thin. And so for John, when his purpose changed from being an investment banker to running a business, all those people who are concerned about money, fame, ego, high-end restaurants, private jets, limousines, all those people said, John, you're nuts.
Hmm.
But not one of them asked him why he wanted to run a business,
Hmm.
except his wife.
Mm.
And his wife asked him why. And John looks at her straight in the eyes, and I'm quoting John now, this just feels right.
Mm.
There's his intuitive signal. So now I've taken a non believer about an hour before, someone not believing in intuition, to him shining a light on his experiences, his signal, how he defines it, how he sees it. And now he's fully understanding what intuition really is. And so the last of the 4 types is called creative intuition. Creative intuition is the ultimate one that gets you to make the decision. So if let's say you're eating lunch or you're going to turn left at the light, your creative intuition is pretty low. That's pretty mundane, sort of, there's not much creativity in that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to make a decision that is outside the norm, which is so obtuse, your creative intuition is high. And
Mm.
so you would think that with John's deep experience as an investment banker, he was making $3 to $4 million a year. He would pick a business that had strong cash flows, healthy revenues, and a really good balance sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Not his intuition. His intuition picks a tiny, bankrupt little restaurant.
Mm.
That restaurant ended up being Eastside Mario's location number one. And,
Wow.
and he grew that to over 1,000 locations. And by the time he retired 20 years later, $2 billion in revenues, all because it felt right. That's the power of intuition.
Mm. Wow. Wow, Sunil, what a story. So you said four: experiential, relational, creative. I missed the second one. I don't know what happened, but
That's okay. Yeah, that's
that's
situational. That's situational.
that's powerful, Sunil. So there's an expression, Sunil, because most of the time, and the first time I heard about intuition, it was that it's something that women have more intuition than men. Is that
Mhm.
true? And
Yes,
you
from
just told me a story about a guy, but do
yeah,
women have more intuition than men?
they do, and this can be actually explained neurologically. Is the neurons actually run for women? More neurons are going across the left and right lobes, and so they're able to tap into both the rational and the emotional more balanced. So they have a lot more empathy, and so that's where intuition is. Intuition really hits that emotional regulation center in the amygdala, and women are much better at regulating the emotions. Whereas for men, our neurons actually go longitudinally. And so it takes a little bit more time. So our decisions run through more risk or more rationalization. And so that's why women are more intuitive than men. But certainly we all have it. We all have our signals. So, and it all works the same way. It's just that when you don't really kind of understand it, and everybody's not basically going through their intuition based on how I'm characterizing it. The neurons themselves are saying women are able to tap into it, quote unquote, faster.
Mm, okay. So how would we encourage men to pay some more attention to these these drives, these desires, intuition? Because and as you rightly said, Sunil, I agree, because a lot of us as men, we you know is impulsivity the same thing as intuition? That's my question, because a lot of us
Yeah.
men, we're pretty impulsive, eh?
Yep. So impulsivity is absolutely correct, and in fact, impulsivity is what you want when it comes to intuition. What happens is sometimes we're impulsive and we're too emotional when we are impulsive, or we're too rational because we're relying on the data, or relying on societal norms, or relying way too much on experience when it comes to decision making. So it's great to be impulsive, but you have to be impulsively informed by an intuitive signal. And a lot of times, for example, we'll make knee jerk reactions that are very emotional, and in some cases we blame intuition. We say intuition kind of led me down this wrong path. And when I've interviewed people and they tell me these stories of how intuition led them down the wrong path, I really really pay attention to what they're saying. And so, for example, I had Mark Metry. He has this Humans 2.0 podcast series. It's the top 100 on Apple iTunes. And he developed something called social anxiety. And what happened with him is that to fit in, he started to lie again and again and again in high school. And he lost who he was. And he almost took his own life. And
Hmm.
so, as he's starting to tell me that story, I was listening really, really closely. So, as he starts to tell me that intuition led him down the wrong path, and then he goes on to tell me that he almost killed himself. And then I said, okay, Mark, if you were to actually rewind this podcast, which obviously I did after our podcast interview, let's look at exactly what you told me. You said that you wanted to, like, intuition led you down the wrong path. But what you said right after that was, I knew I shouldn't have lied, but. And then you told me the story. And so, even as you're recounting your story to me, your intuition is squeezing itself in there saying, I told you so, buddy, but you didn't listen. And you continue to lie and lie and lie. So intuition was always there. He chose to ignore it again and again and again. And fortunately, he didn't take his life.
Wow. So here's my question now, Sunil. Here's my
Yep,
next big question. Is that the same as a gut feeling? Because you hear people talk
absolutely.
about, my gut feeling. I
Yep.
think you have a book about that, don't you?
Yes, my second book is called Gut, because that is a very very common signal that people have. But here's where we have to be careful when we talk about things like voices and gut feeling, because a lot of people talk about that. And yes, gut is one of the primary signals because a lot of the neurons are going through the gut area. And so what happens is that's the first signal that we attribute to intuition. But where you need to be careful is that let's say for you and I, that gut signal is a negative signal, and let's say for you, you've done enough work where you've taken an inventory of your negative signals, and you know that when you get that gut feeling, that's signal number one for you. And if that's signal number one for you, you are absolutely golden, because that first negative signal, if you don't ignore it, you're going to back away from the situation you're in. That's perfect. But what if I made the mistake of saying that, oh yeah, my gut, that is also my signal number one. And if I made the wrong assumption that it's signal number one and it's actually signal number three, what I'm telling myself is that when that gut signal comes, I've missed signal number one and I've missed signal number two. And when I've missed signal number one and signal number two, I've made two bad decisions.
Hmm.
Those two bad decisions could be simply me stubbing my toe, or I could be headed towards bankruptcy. I just don't know.
Hmm. Wow, man, Sunil, you have definitely opened up our eyes to some of those realities because uh, let me ask you this now, as you talk about bad decisions,
Mhm.
Sunil, is it harder for us to acknowledge the that intuition is yelling out to us? Let's say we are overwhelmed, we're overworked, we're sleep deprived,
Mhm.
we're stressed. Is it harder for us when we're in those vulnerable places to acknowledge the cry of intuition? Is there a time when we totally can't recognize it?
We can always recognize it, and what we need to do is there's a place that I call an intuitive medium, and what that is that where do you kind of go to cut out the noise that's going to really help you listen to those intuitive signals. So, for example, for me, what I do is in the shower, like when I'm in the shower, the noise gets cut around me. When I go to Niagara Falls and I rent a room overlooking the falls on generally when the Marriott's up there, I can have my two kids screaming in the background. But when I'm looking at the majestic nature of Niagara Falls and that mist coming up, I'm telling you, I'm in La La Land, and all the noise is cut out, and anything that's coming through are these intuitive signals, my thoughts. I can do planning, and I can map out exactly what I need to do. And one signal after another signal, it's going to guide me. Take this path, take this action, don't take that, do this, do that. And I can map this out. For some people, they'd like to go jogging, walking, cycling, whatever it is for you. You need to step away, get into that intuitive medium, and then start your thoughts. Because if you're overtired, if you're forcing yourself to do things, if you're always looking at your social media, you don't give yourself that time to focus, those intuitive signals are fighting against your emotions, fighting against you being tired. And so you're not listening to them. And they're there. You're just not paying attention. And so this is where you got to be careful where you actually spend that time doing that.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sanil. As I'm listening to you, one of the things that we talk about here, on XY Spark is that whole piece of being self-awareness,
Yes.
self-awareness. And as I'm
Yep.
listening to you, it's so like that is a key piece to 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 connect with that intuitiveness. But Sunil, you know what? We don't want to keep you all night because you've already given us so much meat already.
No
But
problem.
we would not want you to go before you sort of give our listeners, how do they connect with you? You know, what skills and how would you encourage our listeners to sort of tap into that resource and make it work for them?
Absolutely. So the best place to do this is if you go to intuitionology.com, and I'll provide you a link for your listeners, is I have a 7-day challenge that people go through. This is completely free, by the way. And so if you go to intuitionology.com or with the link I'll give you for your show, there's a 7-day challenge you click on. You also get a free copy of my ebook Gut as a resource. But what I do is there's a very specific process by which you need to figure out how to tap into your intuition. And the first thing I do is I get you to just identify a problem that you've been trying to solve in the past and you have not been able to solve. And so that's very, very important. And so you write this down. There's a fillable PDF sheet which you can download and you can reuse every single time for any other problem you have. And so once you have that problem and you've listed down what didn't work, what you want to do is focus on why didn't it work? What did it feel like in those moments? And when you do that, what happens is what you're doing is you're taking inventory or you're taking stock of all the negative signals. Now, this is very important that you do this first. The next thing you do is that you put yourself in that intuitive meeting we were talking about. And let's say, for example, it is the shower. So you put yourself in that shower and then you think about what's going to work. Or you put yourself in the shower and then you go for a walk and then maybe you're jogging and you continue to think about what's going to work. And what happens is you're starting to now put things together that are based on positive intuitive signals that are going to say, okay, I'm going to put this, I'm going to do this step, and I'm going to do that step. And what happens is if you try and force a step in there, that's not the right one. Since you've already done your homework on the negative signals, a negative signal is going to pop up and say, Sunil, step number 3, that's not the step you need. For some reason, you're forcing a step in there, take it out. And so when you're done that, then what you're left with is all the steps that you need to solve that problem. And the next step is, who is going to help you solve that problem? So again, it could be your best friend, it could be a mentor, it could be somebody completely outside, it could be somebody on LinkedIn. But again, you don't want to force your best friend in this because maybe it's sexy and cool to do a 7-day challenge and you're bringing your best friend in there. Again, a negative intuitive signal is going to go, Sunil, don't be forcing someone in there. You know that this person is not going to help you. And so what happens is now your intuition's filtering all those people to only select those who are going to help you solve that specific problem. And then after that, you look at what environment you have to change, and then you actually take action. And in that 7-day challenge, I actually measure your intuition on a percentage basis from day 1 and day 7. And I have now close to 55,000 people through that challenge now. 100% of the time, their intuition has gotten stronger. And the other thing I have going with you is I have 2 people that take this challenge, and you've got the videos of them with the tasks that they do on top of yours. And one of them is a fellow by the name of John Harris. He actually sold his house in that 7-day challenge. On day 1, he had this realtor that threw this card in his face, and he was about to sell his house for $20,000 under asking price. He used to. But he knew his intuition was saying something was wrong with this person. Maybe I should hold on. And by day 7, he sold his house for $50,000 over asking price. He actually had a bidding war. So that's a $70,000 decision. That's $10,000 a day. Not bad for a 7-day challenge, which is free, by the way. The second person is somebody by the name of Ashley Michelle. She actually was a witness to a homicide. Not only was she a witness to a homicide, she actually walked into the apartment when after her boyfriend had just murdered one of their best friends in the bathtub. She basically came in, walked in, he shut the door behind her, locked all the doors, put a knife to her back, and he said, I'm already going away for 1 murder. Might as well make it 2. You're next. Her intuition had to calm her down, had to watch him to make sure he was calm, and he choked her, he assaulted her, broke a couple of blood vessels in her neck. He asked her to clean up the blood. And so there was an intuitive moment, a fleeting moment. Her intuition said, run now. And she took that opportunity, ran, unlocked the doors, ran down 18 flights stairs from the apartment building, obviously called 911 and was able to live to tell me the story. She used the 7 day challenge to basically minimize, I didn't get rid of the PTSD, depression, anxiety. And so what she learned in that 7 day challenge was that she was able to go back to the gym where she felt really, really good. Again, we were talking about the intuitive moments. That was her solace. And the other thing she learned is how to start trusting people. And so she absolutely is a fan of what I'm doing because this has changed her life. Instead of stepping out of her apartment and looking over her shoulder 24/7, she's now able to just live life. She's able to go jogging again. She's able to go to the gym. She's able to start trusting people. So if people like John Harris and Ashley Michelle can go through the 7 day challenge and solve their problems, you have no excuse. You can solve whatever problem under the sun you have in 7 days, and it's completely free.
Wow, thank you so much, Sunil. We're grateful for you being here with us, Sunil, and we just want to know that you have automatically become a part of the XY Spark family. So
Thank
we
you.
just want you to know that there's an open invitation for you to come back anytime. We thank you so much for sharing all this useful, powerful information with us, and I'm hoping that our listeners have gotten some good meat. I wonder if any one of our listeners have any quick questions that you want to just put in there for Sunny, because we have just maybe a couple of minutes
Sure,
to do
absolutely.
so. If any one of our listeners have any questions, please go ahead. As you're thinking about that, let me ask you this, Sunil, because I have a question. I'm curious. Is there a
Mhm.
difference? Because, there are some persons who intuition cause them to never ever make any decisions. They don't take risks. They're scared. They prefer to stay in their quote unquote comfort zone.
Right.
So how do we encourage persons who live their lives like that to
Yeah.
make a
So
different?
the biggest thing when that happens is fear. Fear is a killer. Well, actually, fear is one of your best friends, and here's why. The reason why people fear moving ahead is for a number of reasons, but primarily there's some kind of trauma in the past which they can't get out of emotionally. And so that's some of the things that I work on one-on-one with people to get rid of that trauma so that they can move ahead. Another thing that happens is sometimes they have somebody gave them a piece of advice or told them something really negative in the past, and that's hit them, and that piece of advice just put them in the wrong place and just emotionally took them into some kind of a spiral, and they're living life today based on that piece of advice. Or what's happened in the past is they want to show somebody that they're better than what they think they are. And what happens is when we live in the past, we sacrifice our values in the present. And we don't live life in the present. What we're doing is we're reacting to something in the past. And so then we develop this fear that we can't do things on our own. We don't trust ourselves because we just don't. And when we don't trust ourselves, we don't adhere to the values that we really want to live our life by. And so one of the case studies I show is there's a fellow that I interviewed, David Dame, who had cerebral palsy. And so he's been in a wheelchair all his life. And what happened to him is that his dream was to actually just go to a beach and feel the sand and the water through his toes. And a number of years ago, he got that chance. He had his friends wheel him up to the edge of the water sand barrier, stand him up, and he falls flat on his face. And the embarrassment came in, the fear came in, and he said, Sunil, I have two things I can do right at this moment. The first thing is I can succumb to that fear and sit back in my wheelchair and forever regret of turning that dream into a reality. I am right here. Or I can I can just battle that fear and listen to that intuitive signal that's saying, David, take a step in the water. David, take step number 2. David, take step number 3. And he continues to do that. And he points to his chin and he says the water gets up to his chin level, and then he turns back.
Hmm.
And he was blown away by how far he came. And so you need to battle the fear. And neurologically, fear is your best friend, because when you actually have fear, when you do things that are uncomfortable, your neurons are actually awake and saying, give me a new neural pathway. Let's not go to the bad habits. So if you look at brain plasticity research, that's exactly what your neurons are doing. And so when you trust those intuitive signals to move ahead, boy, oh boy, your brain is ready for new beginnings. And you just have to battle that. And it could be frightening, but you got to do it. And the main thing is take action and don't fall back into the old patterns of thinking and old habits. And one of the fellows and I'll be quick here because I know you've got to get going, but one of the fellows I interviewed was a fellow by the name of Vin Jiang, and he used to be an international magician, and now he's gone on to do some stuff on communication. In 2016, his life was at the peak. He was speaking to 100,000 people around the world, 80 stages around the world, and everything on the outside was looking amazing, except on the inside, he felt like crap. And so he goes away to New Zealand in a place where there's no cell phone service, puts up these values on the wall, and he says, you know what? This is what my wife wants. This is what my kids want. This is what society wants. This is what money wants. This is what my career wants. Where am I? And he takes down all the values, puts the new ones up, which he said was frightening to give him that liberty. And he comes back to LA and falls right back to the old ways of doing things, right back to surrounded by the same old people that put him there before. And it was 6 months later, and his parents came up from Australia, and his mom said, there's this Vietnamese saying that his mom was telling him, if you hang around squid, eventually you're going to get some ink on you. And his mother said, you're hanging around way too much squid. That's not my boy. And so he redid that exercise 6 months later, and he was able to now move away from downtown LA to start, making the trip back to Australia, where he wanted to go. And so he started doing things for himself. And one of the things I told him is I said, Vin, there's something called opportunity cost that people don't think about. It wasn't just the 6 months of the bad decisions that he made, going back to the old way of doing things. It's also the 6 months that he could have gained by doing things for himself. So he actually lost a full year of his life. And the other thing I told him is that if you're in the business of helping 100,000 people a year, how many people did you leave behind? How many people did you not help? And he said, Sunil, I've never thought about it that way. So when you succumb to fear, when you don't take action, when you don't do your homework on these intuitive signals, you're wasting twice your life or more wasted on bad decisions. So don't do that. I'm giving you the tools to stop that today.
Wow. Sunil, thank you, man. Listen, man, I just want to say, Sunil, we are so grateful that you stopped by, and we're so grateful for the information that you've shared. And we're saying to all the men who have been following XY Spark, this is your moment. This is your time. This is a presentation for you to break away from that fear and let change occur. Thank you so much, Sunil, for being here with us tonight. And do you have any last words that you want to say before we wrap up, Sunil?
The only thing I would say is just take action, follow through, trust your signals, do the homework. You don't want to be just walking the talk and not acting on it. You got it. You got to move ahead. Because remember, every bad decision is twice the cost. So don't do it.
Thank you, Sunil. This is your boy Rolando with XY Spark, guys. Thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you, Sunil, for being with us. And we will see you again real soon. Have a great night. Peace out, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Please join Rolando next time on XY Spark as he engages us in practical discussions that promotes healthy masculinity and challenge men to live extraordinary lives. At XY Spark, we believe the key for happier families is restoring healthy masculinity.